So basically what I wanted to do today was kind of go through building a very simple HTML structure. And this is kind of along the same parameters as the Level 2 module for web.
Okay.
So I'll build it out an HTML structure that kind of fits that format, and then put a CMS document or a CSS document in to make some modifications to it and make it actually format it to look like that. So I'm using a program. I'm using a program called Brackets, and then I'll use CyberDuck to upload it. I have a website already. I can just upload it to. And I'll just be starting from scratch, sort of. Like if I create a new file in Brackets, I actually have a plugin for Brackets called HTML Templates. That allows me to just choose an HTML5, and it'll give me the basic structure of an HTML page. So I don't have to create all this. I just have to customize it. So I'm going to just call this blocks exercise, and it's going to be responsive. So I'll just put that in. Responsive is just dealing with the page knowing what size the browser is and responding to that. So it's not responsive is sort of a little ethereal because HTML by itself is technically responsive because your text will resize to fit whatever, or your lines of paragraphs will resize to fit whatever size your screen is. But we'll add some things to make like flexible width columns and that kind of stuff in there. So the cool thing about Brackets is that once I actually saved this as an HTML document, it's a smart program. So it will highlight and color code different types of HTML. So my elements are blue, my attributes are green, and the attribute values are orange, and then the content itself is going to be white. So basically what I start out by doing is putting in a simple structure using some semantic elements, header, nav, main, and footer. So header, nav, main, and footer are just semantic elements that browsers will look at, and it's usually things like Google. When Google goes and crawls your site looking for like SEO stuff. So it'll look at a site and it'll say this is the header, this content is at the top of the page, this is the nav, this is the menu, and then main content. Normally from page to page on a large site, contents of the header, so if I'm going to put like an H1 in my header, that's going to stay consistent across multiple pages of the same site. So I'm just going to call this header to be original. In the nav is normally where I put my menu. Sometimes you'll see nav inside of header as part of the header. Sometimes you'll see it between header and the main content. It's just kind of up to the developer. There's no rules regarding that. There's just some sort of best practices to put the nav at the top. So we'll put in there, we'll just do like a UL or something and create a couple, we'll just do a couple links. Index.html is a home page link because by default the home page of a website is called index. I'm going to just make up another one. This doesn't exist, but And you'll kind of notice as I'm working in brackets, I'll type a piece of code and it'll start suggesting something. If I've got an open element and I type the close slash, it'll automatically finish it for me because it says, okay, you've got an open UL here. If you start typing close, it knows what it needs to do and it just does it. That kind of confuses people sometimes because they want to then type it and don't realize that brackets did it for them, and so then they'll get it in there twice. Yeah. So within my main, that's where I'm going to put all like my main content. So basically, what I'm going to do is put in a couple columns, and I'm just going to use a division, and we're going to give it a class of column underscore half. So we'll do a 50-50 split. And then I'll do another one. And I can use the same class name. So then I really only have to create one rule in my CSS and it'll apply to both of these.
Okay.
I could do, say if I wanted to do something like column third, I could create a CSS class for that. And then maybe I want to create a 2/3 column. So what I like to do is I like to create generic class names that I can apply over and over again, multiple places, multiple times. And mix and match. If I have a third and 2/3, I maybe do a third, a third, and a third. So I have 3 columns, or a third and 2/3. Or if I do a half, a quarter, and a quarter, I could do 1/4, 1/4, and 1/2 to make a full. It's kind of all about how you can make it simple enough that you can reuse stuff over and over.
Can you go to like the website to kind of see like what you just did and how it looks on the website?
Right now it won't look like anything.
Okay.
Well, I can. Let me save it. And I'll go back to my browser. And I will open. This is all it shows at this point.
Okay.
Because the only thing that really shows up on my page is the content. So header,
Okay.
home, contact. None of these have any content in them yet.
So you're just setting those up.
This is just framework.
Okay.
Yep. There's no visible content. When I go into my footer, maybe I'll put a paragraph in there and do copyright symbol 2017. I don't know what date it is. Put an email link in here. So I just have a paragraph in my footer. So if I save it, I reload my browser. There's my footer there. So what I'll do is when I put the CSS in here, I gotta go back and I'll put some things. So we'll do like an H2 here. We'll call this column 1. Column 2,
Yeah.
I'll just kind of go through
So
here.
in the orange brackets, where it's like column half, like that could be anything, right? Or like that could be, like that's just kind of your value that you've named it?
That's the class name that I've given it.
Okay.
And I've basically made that up.
Like it could be capital A or capital B, and it could kind of be the same thing, right?
Capital.
Like
You're talking about this?
Yeah. Like, is that...
This is whatever I say it is.
Okay.
Because what I do when I create my CSS is I match. I create a rule that has this value, or that selects this particular name.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll show you when I get to that. Maybe it'll make more sense when I actually start building the CSS.
Okay.
So I have 4 columns here, and it's going to be 2 stacked on top of 2, because half and half equal a full. So if I save this now, there's all my content I spelled. So what I do is normally when I'm working on a site, I'll just be working, do a Command S, switch over to my browser and then Command R to reload, and it's really quick to just kind of switch back and forth. But what I'll do is as I'm building the CSS, I'll put borders around all this stuff to kind of see where everything lines up and how it all fits together. So that's basic. That's a basic structure. I mean, if I were to do other things, you know, maybe I could put a paragraph in there. Maybe I would put an image in there. Now let's see here. I think I got an image here I can use. Oops. I'll go back and find it. And just copy this in here. So I'm just going to bring in an images folder of stuff that I've used previously. So back here I have a source. I'm looking in my images folder for brown background. I don't know, this is just a random image. And alt attributes are the description. So there's a paragraph, there's an image. If I save this, that's what I end up with. And that's probably not what I want.
So does the alt, that's just in the code, like that, you can't see that on the website?
You can see it, and actually let me undo that. So if I were to, and if I'm in Chrome, I can do images, disable images. If I reload the, it says images have been disabled. Now it should show me. Okay, let me break this. So if the image breaks, the image isn't working, then that's what it shows the problem. That's my alt.
I need to ask you something real quick about the cameras. I'm doing photography too, and you know when you have to like on that sheet you say like what all the stuff is. You know you write down about your pictures, each picture. Yeah. Like what is it like the
documentation.
Yeah. When you take a picture, does it show you on the camera?
Yes.
It does.
You just have to hit there's a menu button, info.
Yeah, info.
There's an info button. You just hit that a couple times and it'll cycle through a number of different things on the screen.
I just want to make sure the camera does it, not like you put it on your computer and stuff. Just
right. The camera will.
Right.
You can take it into Photoshop and go to photo info.
What was it?
File Command I.
Command I. That's
Or
right.
in Photoshop it's Command Option Shift I. No. Lightroom will show you. Photoshop preview on a Mac will show you. You can just get Command I to the info and.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Thank you.
But yeah, the camera shows you. You just have to hit the info button until it cycles through a number of different types of things that display.
Okay.
Until you find the one that shows it.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
So this is what happens when an image doesn't work. Then the alt attribute value gets shown instead. So I'm gonna remove that because I actually wanted to use that in the CSS. The other cool thing about brackets, you notice this is all like indented and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Brackets, and I have this thing called Beautify put on brackets, which basically indents nested elements. So these H2 and paragraphs are inside of a div. This div is inside of main.
Right.
Main and nav are parallel, like next to each other, which UL's inside of nav, LI's inside of UL, that kind of thing. Yeah. So it helps visually to kind of see where stuff is and how it's organized to have this indented. That's just a little plugin that you can get for brackets. Okay. So now I'm pretty much done with my HTML except for I got to add a link. So I'm going to add a style sheet. Type equals text CSS. href is where it's located, and I haven't created it yet, so I'm just going to call it blockstyles.css. Now, it's not going to change anything. It's just looking for a file called that, and until I create that file, this doesn't really do anything.
Right. Okay.
So I save that, and then I'm just going to create a new document. And the cool thing about brackets is I can set this up to view in a split mode, and then I can take my documents and split them. So I have one on one side and one on the other side, and I can work them side by side. Now this one's empty right now, so I want to save. Excuse me, I want to save it as. Now here's where naming becomes a big deal. I have to name it blockstyles.css.
Right.
So I paste that in. I have to put it in the same folder. So it's in the same folder as my blocks.html. I save it. Now, and this is something I usually define at the top, because you see in the HTML there's a meta tag that defines character set to UTF-8. I usually define it in the CSS also, just at the top. And then what I could do is I can come in here and I can start messing with a global. I usually do a global selectors to start with, and I set my margin to 0. I set my padding to 0. And again, brackets is smart. If I start typing something, it's going to suggest, and I can just hit enter to finish. So I can set all those things to 0. Because some browsers, in fact most browsers, have a built-in CSS, a built-in style sheet that adds margin and padding to certain elements.
Okay.
And I don't want that. I want to be able to, I want everything set to 0 so I can control that. Maybe I'm just anal or something about it, I don't know. But I want to be able to control all that. So then what I can do is I usually start with my largest element on the page, which is the HTML element. And let's say I want my background color to be, this is a cool thing about brackets. I can choose a color, I can right click that color, I can go to quick edit, and it gives me a color picker. So I don't have to actually know from the start out what color I want or what the code is for it. I can choose a color from my color picker. So say I want blue.
Scanning the internet for some code.
You can do that, but this is probably easier.
That's a lot, yeah, it's okay. I like that.
The nice thing about this is I also have Rgba, which is a transparency value. A stands for alpha. So red, green, and blue, alpha. That's the formative values here. So this gives me a or a level of transparency with a color. So I can select this particular color, which is, here's my preview, and then close this, and so it gives me the code. Then it puts the code in for that color.
Okay.
So I can do that in my HTML. I can close that. So now I'm kind of working my way down from largest to smallest of the elements. So the next thing, of course, would be body. And there are a few CSS rules and declarations that apply cascade, like font family will cascade. So if I set it in body, I don't have to set it in header or nav or UL or LI or anchor, because it'll cascade from body down to those other elements.
Okay.
So I set my font family to, let's say, Tahoma, back up to Geneva, back up to sans serif, which is a system default basically for the sans serif font. What this is saying is that it's going to look for Tahoma first. Failing to find that, it's going to fall back to look for Geneva. Failing to find that, it's going to just fall back to whatever the default sans serif is for that
So it's like
computer.
if the thing running it doesn't have this
Right.
font, then, okay.
If the computer running it doesn't have Tahoma, it's going to look for Geneva. If it doesn't have Geneva, it's going to just say, okay, give me whatever sans serif you got.
And can you, like, you can do this on a normal HTML document, right? It's just this kind of cleans it up. Is that the idea, or?
You talking about setting rules?
Yeah. Or does it
You
have to
can,
be
in a-
CSS?
It's still technically CSS. There are 3 levels of CSS though. This is external CSS, which refers to it being a separate document.
Okay.
There is document level CSS, which refers to a style element that exists in the head of your HTML. So what I could do is I could come in here and I could put this rule. Maybe if I wanted to do this, I could copy this rule. I could put it in the style element there. That would then apply at a document level.
Okay.
Or there's also an inline. So say I wanted body to have a style element or a style attribute. You can see I'm messing up the code, so it thinks there's all kinds of errors down the page.
Yeah. So
there's the 3 levels. So external is a separate page. Document level is CSS in the head,
Okay.
and then inline is CSS actually within an element tag. But I prefer external simply because when you start working with multiple pages, having a single CSS document is a lifesaver.
Okay.
Because you can change it one place and it changes it across the entire website.
Gotcha.
So
I think
font size.
I took an HTML class a while ago. I think we just did like everything in one document or something.
Which you can. And when you're doing a single page, that works great.
Mm-hmm.
When you're doing 2 pages, it's okay. When you're doing 10 pages, it's a little tedious.
Right.
When you're doing 150 pages, it's ridiculous. So it kind of depends on the scope of your site.
Okay, yeah.
I always just recommend doing it externally because then it's scalable.
Mm-hmm.
You can always add 10 more pages if you need them,
Right.
and you don't have to mess with CSS.
Okay.
So next I want to do so I'm setting some global things here: font family, font size, color, which is I don't know why they don't call it font color, because it's a color is for the font. We're just gonna do an RGB 1010. This is almost black. I don't like pure black or pure white, so I usually do just almost black or almost white, like a few degrees off.
Okay.
My experience with projected media is that pure of any color is bad. It's usually safer to have almost solid red or almost solid black or almost solid white instead of pure white, pure black, pure red.
Okay.
That's just from working in projection. Like projectors don't do well with solid pure colors.
Oh.
So, and I on a computer screen, you probably can't even really tell a difference between 10% or 10 out of 250 versus 0 out of 250. I mean, that's less than 4%.
Can you go to the web page real fast?
Yeah. So I save it, I reload. Now, that's what I've done. I've set the background color. I've gotten rid of all of my padding and margin, so everything's clumped together. I've set my text color, which you really can't tell, and the font has changed. And the font size changed too. It got a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
So now what I can do is I can come down and do my main elements. And I just call up a rule for header. So I'm basically using element selectors up to this point, except for my global selector at the star at the top. That selects every single element on the page. Do not use that for things like border or background color, because then every single element on your page will have a border and or a background color. It's a little bit not necessary.
Okay.
So then we have header, which all I'm going to really do here is give it a border. Actually, we're going to do this width 100%, and I'm using percent. I could make it pixels, I could make it inches, I could make it ems, which is based on the font size. Percent is based on the window size, and that's why when I talk about flexibility, that will be flexible with the browser window. And you'll kind of see what I'm talking about when I start putting these together and adding more CSS. So width, border, 1 pixel, solid. Some of the CSS rules you have the option to put multiple values for. So for border, I can add multiple values: 1 pixel, solid, dotted for the style. So if I save that, I reload. Oh, I didn't close it. Save it. Now I reload. Something missing? Oh. Solid color. Red. There we go. Can't do solid and dotted at the same time. Now, here's an issue. Over on this right-hand side, you can't really tell, but you see there appears to be no border here.
Yeah.
Like on the left side, you see a red 1 pixel, and actually, if it might help if I make it 10 pixels. That makes it more obvious.
Yeah.
So here I have 10 pixels. Here I have nothing.
So they're not full screen or something?
No, this is full screen. It doesn't matter what I do. That's never going to show, because the reason is I have a width of 100% plus a 10 pixel border. What is 100% plus 10?
110%?
110 plus 10 pixels. 110% plus 10 pixels. How do you calculate that? It's a trick question. You can't. There's no way. So what I have to do, and this is kind of backtracking a little bit, but I did this on purpose, is I can come back up to my select all, my global, and tell it box sizing border box. And let me explain this. By default, the browser assigns the width of an element to the element plus to the element inside of whatever border, padding, or margin exists. So if you've seen the CSS box model, oh, I have images turned off. That might. Let's turn them back on and reload. So if you've seen the CSS box model, you have content surrounded by padding, surrounded by border, surrounded by margin. So all of 4 of those things play into the dimensions of an object on a web page. Whether it's text, whether it's an image, a link, it doesn't matter. Everything has this model of layers around it. So when you measure by default, the width of an element at 100% is the width of the actual content at 100%. That is the default setting. If I change that to border box up here, then the width of the element is the width of the content plus padding plus border. So at 100%, now it's measuring from the outside of my border to the outside of my border rather than from the edge of my content to the edge of my content. So what that will do is once I save this and I go back, now you see that that border is there because what it's doing is saying, okay, from the edge of the border to the edge of the border is 100%. It's doing the calculation to figure out how wide my actual content needs to be to stay within that measurement. And if I added padding in here, which I should, just for effect, let's say 20 pixels, save it, reload. Now padding also gets included in there in that measurement. So padding plus margin, or margin is outside. So padding plus border plus content equals 100% when my box sizing is set to border box.
Gotcha.
So it saves me from having to figure out what 100% plus 20 plus 40 pixels is because I can't. There's no way for me to calculate that. Because every time I change the window size, that changes. So then I don't have to worry about if I set my column half to width 50%, I don't have to worry about whether I have 50% plus 1% margin or border or padding or whatever on there. Now, the caveat is border is separate. Let's do 20 pixels. Border just to see what it looks like. Border is outside of that border box. Sorry, margin, not border. So margin is outside of that. So if I add margin, again, I lose that right side.
So you'd have to set it to the margin to get it back.
So margin, I still have to there is no margin box.
Oh, okay.
So border box is the limit. So in order for margin to work properly, I'd have to go to like 90% and then change this to a matching value. I can't add percent plus pixels because that just doesn't compute. So I make it 5%. And remember, it's on both sides, so it's 5% on one side, 90% width, 5% on the other side. That adds up to my 100%. Then there's my 5%, there's my 90, and then on this side is my other 5%. What I could have done if I really wanted this sort of thing to go on is I could have added body. I could have said border or margin 0 top and bottom, 5% left and right. Gotten rid of this. Save it. Does kind of the same thing. I don't know, not really. Oh, I still have to change this back to 100. That does the same thing. I just got rid of the top margin. So if I really wanted it to be, and here it's flexible, because when I resize this, this is still 5%, this is still 90%. But it's based on different measurements, like measurements of the body versus the header. I could do the same thing with What's next? Nav. I'm not going to go into like a whole thing of how to create a menu. I'm just going to do a nav 100%. We're just going to make them different colors. Just to sort of illustrate where these things are. So I save that, I reload it. Now there's my nav space. So I can format my nav within there somewhere if I wanted to center it and make buttons, however I want to do that with CSS.
So if you were to create another page, that would carry over.
Yeah, so the header and nav, if I were to create a second or third pages, I would maintain the consistency of these across multiple pages.
Yeah.
So, because when you go to a website, you expect that the header and the nav are probably going to stay the same from page to page. In fact, you would hate it if the menu was moving around on you and you had to search for it every time you went to change pages. So main, I'll kind of do the same thing. Width of 100%. Border 5 pixel, solid, blue. And I'm just using colors because it's faster. I'm not going to put padding on it. But that's what that looks like. And then I go again, we'll do footer while we're on a roll here. Width of 100%. Make it green. So there's my footer. So now I want to do some columns because I've defined columns here, 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 and here in the middle. So I can set those up by simply creating class rules. And so if I'm calling up a class, you know how to call up a class in CSS or how to create a rule for a class?
No, I don't.
For a class name, it's a dot and then the name of the class. So dot column half creates a rule for column half. And basically all I really need to do here is define a width 50% because I mean that's half is 50%. I'll do float. Float left allows the elements below it to wrap up on the right side. And float's sort of an interesting thing to wrap your head around because float left, float right don't necessarily do exactly what you think they're going to do. In fact, well, if
But
you
I
know
also
what they're...
know what they're You want a cupcake, Tristan?
Sure.
Go get one.
My general rule of thumb is always float left. 95% of the time I float left.
Oh yeah, you don't really want to. Oh, I know what you mean. Like because you think, oh, I want these two next to each other. One floats left, one floats right. When you should actually just float everything left. They'll go
Right.
next to each other.
That makes it easier too if you're building a single rule to create columns. You can have both columns do float left and then
Right. They
have
just
one
set the
rule.
width and
yeah.
Get one on one tutoring, huh?
Yeah,
One
right.
on one tutoring.
Well, I'm recording it so I can put it up too.
Sorry.
That's okay. So I've added padding. I'm going to add a border again. 5 pixel solid. What color? I don't know. Brown. Save that. Reload. So there are my two columns. Column 1 and column 2. This is messy. We'll fix that in a bit. There are a few things that I want to modify because technically my main is ending before column 1 starts. You see the blue box right here disappears.
Yeah.
It should be going all the way around all of this, and then footer should not be floating up right here. See how that green bar should... This is why I put borders on everything, because otherwise you can't see how these position themselves.
Ah, okay.
And you think, well, it looks like they're working okay, but they're really not. So there's a few things I need to do, and I always have to look this up. Micro... Clear fix. There's a little bit of CSS code. Here we go. That's not the one I want. This one. There's a little bit of CSS code that you can put into your rules. It's just an overflow. What it does is the clear fix allows these elements to actually fill the spaces they were supposed to fill. So what I'll do is I'll add it to main. So this, oops, I did not get it copied. Copy, paste, there we go. So overflow auto, so I save that and then I reload. Now you see my blue box is back where you envision it that it should be. So I got to do that to the columns also. So I do column half and I just add that clear overflow auto, which is a sort of a workaround, and it doesn't show me any different at this point because I haven't added 3 and 4 into the mix yet. They're still oh, because I didn't close this first column half properly. There we go. So there's 3 and 4. And we're going to have column 3 is hanging up on the edge of this column, so we may have to do something about that, but we'll do that. And then we'll create a rule for column third, which is essentially the same thing except my width is 33.33%. And you can do up to 3 decimal points in CSS, which is kind of useful. Float left, padding 10 pixels, and I can't type very well. 5 pixels solid, purple. I'm just making everything a different color. And they'll put that little clear fix thing on it. And we reload. Now, column 4 still doesn't have anything defined, but you can see kind of what column 3 is doing is it's hanging up on the corner down here.
Yeah.
So I need to fix that. I'll create a rule after I do the next one. I call it 2/3, yeah. So column 2/3, same thing, essentially. In fact, what I might do is just copy paste. And instead of making it 33 1/3, it's just 66.66. And I'll change the color to yellow. Yellow doesn't show up very well, but it'll work. Save that. Reload. So there we go. Now we got a little bit of a mess here. So what we have to do, there's a couple ways I can handle this. The best way would probably be just, at this point, add a clear float class to my column 3, because I want column 3 to drop down and create its own new see if this, I think this is going to work. I'll try it. I may have to reorder these a little bit. It didn't do anything. Save them both. There we go. So that clear float, and probably what I need to do is put that first before my columns. Yeah. So what that did basically is it told column 3 stop floating because it's still trying to float up beside column 1 and column 2. So the clear float, the clear attribute in the CSS tells it to stop floating. So I'm clearing it, and then once it gets here, then it says, well, now we float left again. So it clears first, and then it floats left, which allows it to drop down, and then float left allows this to wrap up beside it. So now I have column half, column 3rd, column 2/3.
So floating kind of like just continuing off of the last thing. That
Yes, float keeps going until you tell it to stop.
Okay.
So every element below whatever I floated, every element's going to try and wrap up beside it. Which means I should probably tell my footer to clear. So I just tell my footer to clear both. And I can tell it to clear left or right, depending on which float I have above. But both is a good way to go because I don't want it to wrap either direction. So I say that. It doesn't really make a difference technically because the end of my main the blue box here, which is main. The end of my main technically ends the float because float is contained within whatever element inside of, or whatever parent element it has. So then my footer is down here. So now the cool thing is I can resize this, and these things are very flexible. I want to do a couple other things, and then I want to talk a little bit more about actually adding some responsiveness into it. And I got a few minutes. How much time you got?
I got that.
Okay. It's only 4:20. So I can use CSS to do a few other cool things. Like I did background color for HTML, right? So I can do background. I can add a background image to this. And I can tell it we're going to go for a URL. And it's gonna start trying to be smart on me. And so I can just kind of go through and say, okay, I want to go to images. I want to add actually header, or actually next, yeah, let's just do this. See what that looks like. I don't want it to, it's going to tile automatically, but I maybe only want it to repeat like horizontally. So I tell it to repeat X. I save it and I reload. Now that puts that image in the background of my header, and it's actually tiled.
Right.
If I tell it to repeat none or no repeat, it's going to show it once, one instance of it, and it's because it's not a very big image.
Right. Okay.
This is a bad example of an image because it's a terrible image, but it works okay.
Yeah.
So if I tell it to repeat X, and it's a way. Ordinarily, what I would probably do this is like a really small image, and then it's the reason for that is it's a really small file size in my small image, and then I can have it just repeat, and it looks like it's a really big image, and it's flexible because I can expand this or contract it. It'll only repeat as long as it has to.
Right. So
which
it's
is kind of cool.
It's not stretching. It's just putting another picture on it.
Yes. Right. It's tiling it. I can do something like, and that's hard to read, so maybe I can customize my font color, make it Alice Blue. I could, now this is getting into more like styling of it, making it look pretty. Well, the background's not pretty, but that's kind of the idea. So I can add images to a background of an element and have them behind, in addition to having them actually as an image in the HTML, which I could do. So one of the things I want to do with this is at some point, these columns are really too narrow to do much with. Like the column 3, I don't want this to break down. So at some point, I want these columns to stop being half and half columns and just go into being like full width and stack all 4 of them on top of each other.
Okay. Yeah.
So I can use what's called a media query to do that. And basically what I would do is I would create a new rule, and I would give it a, let's try minimum width of 640 pixels. And then I would encompass all of these things in that new rule. So what that's saying is now at this media width, a minimum width of 640 pixels, these rules apply. So if I reload this page, at 640 pixels, all of a sudden I have no more columns. Because that rule doesn't apply after this size. So then what I can do is I can come down here and I say, okay, I just want to create a rule for all of these. What happens to them at smaller than 640 pixels? So I create a rule that says column half, and I may need to change the order of this. Column half, column third, column 2 thirds, and that comma between them tells it to apply it to all of these elements. So it's saying column half and column third and column 2/3. This is the rule. So width 100%. And I might have done this a little bit differently and reversed it to say maximum width 640, which may actually be a better way to do it. So maybe if I rethink this, what I would do is I would take this rule, I would cut it from here, I would paste it into my immediate query, I would change it to maximum, because this is actually requiring less code. So now what it's saying is at media, anything smaller than 640 is going to have column half, column third, column 2/3 with a width of 100%. Otherwise, it's going to go to these. So I kind of reversed my thinking on that. It doesn't change anything about how this works. All it does is not work. Did I do this right? Max width 640. I think I should have put this below X. So I cut that out, I save it down there. And then, yeah. So here's an instance where CSS order matters. Since it's reading the document top to bottom, it's going to take this value, these are all going to apply until I hit something that says differently. Now this only says differently if my width is below 640 pixels. So what it's going to do is it's going to say column half is 50%, and when it gets to this, it's going to say what's the width of the window. If it's above 640, it ignores everything in here, which would have set this. If it's not, then it says, okay, we're going to take this width and apply it. Since this is below my original width, that's applied instead. So it takes the lower down, the rule that's lower in the CSS is closer to the document. So I save it, I reload. Now at 640 pixels, my columns change from half and half and third and 2/3 to full columns. So I've applied basic, and you can do this with things like, maybe within that space. Let's do this then. So add a max width. So let's try adding another rule in here. So down here we're going to say header, background image. We're going to change the background image. Because sometimes what you might want to do is have a video or an animated something at a desktop size.
Right.
And then when you go to a mobile size, you don't want them to download that bandwidth.
Oh.
So you just give them a plain old image.
Okay.
So in this case, we're going to go to images, and I have another image in here. We got a header.jpg. We're going to do background position. Just going to center it. We're going to do background. What else we got here? Size. We're just going to do cover. So that'll kind of fit within. So what we're doing is we're changing the background image, and we're adding some rules to this background image based on this width of the browser window. So we save it, we reload. Nothing changes at this size, but as soon as I get down to 640 pixels, that background changes because of that rule. So at that size, now my CSS is telling me put a different image in there. And so maybe at this size it's an animated something, it's a video maybe. At this size it's something else, something lighter weight.
That's cool.
Should have done it the other way around probably, because put the repeated image in there at a smaller size, but yeah, this illustrates it. And that's basically how media queries work. You can set up multiple levels of media query. In fact, for the College of Journalism website and university in general, there is a setup like predetermined breakpoints. So at 480 pixels, 640, 768, 960, 1280. So at each of these points, there is set into the CSS those media queries which define what happens at that size.
So something changes.
So something changes at that size. And it's kind of based on, in this case, it's based on switching from a 4-column layout to a 3-column layout at a certain size, or from a 5-column layout to a 4-column layout. And a good example of that is the College of Journalism's website has a great example of that in the faculty and staff directory. So at this size, we have a 5-column layout. If we resize our window at a certain point, we hit a breakpoint and it snaps to 4 columns. We keep going, we hit another breakpoint and it snaps to 3 columns. We keep going, we hit another breakpoint eventually, and then it'll be 2 columns. And that's as small as it gets. So 2, 3, 4, 5, and then so it kind of keeps pictures from going too big or too small, because it allows you to sort of control at what size they change from 2 to 3 to 4, which is particularly useful. This is basically the same principle, a little bit simpler scale. When you throw that in with the flexibility of percent-based widths, you get a really overall flexible website, responsive. Any other questions?
How would you add another page to an HTML document?
Another page?
Yeah.
That's a whole separate document.
Okay.
So what I would do, say if I wanted to contact HTML, I would literally create an HTML document, call it contact, whatever, and save it as contact.html. So I put it in same folder, same directory, save it. Now if I reload and I click contact, it goes to that.
Okay.
There's nothing, this is all that's on that page, but that's the idea, is it?
Oh yeah.
It's a separate document. Now that's one way to do it. If you're working with a CMS like Drupal or Dreamweaver, there's other ways with other types of code, PHP or JavaScript, that will bring in other pages. Like if you go to, I have a website that I set up here. This is all one HTML document, but there are multiple sections that when you click, there's actually JavaScript that runs to switch out what's viewed. So you can click this, and it'll actually slide. There's one document that's just sort of sliding back and forth behind a viewport.
Okay.
It's a pretty simple page. It's only 3, but it kind of gives you. There's ways to build single HTML. Like if you look at the code for this, it is one long. Well, it's not even that long. It's a longer HTML page, but it's all in one page. The whole site is one document. Well, one document plus some JavaScript files and a CSS file and another CSS file.
So if you create a website with multiple pages with multiple HTML documents, so do you just upload each document to the internet, or
Yeah, and I can show you that real quick.
Sure.
So using CyberDuck, if I have and this is where you have to have I don't know if I can do this without showing my password. That's all right. So then I connect. What it does is it shows me so this is my website directory. I go into my actual site, and this is stuff that's already there. So for instance, if I were to, I'm just going to create a new directory, call it blocks. Just call it blocks. So then what I can do is I can go to blocks. So I'm in my public HTML, which is my website. I'm actually in a directory in there. And I can go back to what I just created are these 4 pages and this images directory. I can drag and drop into CyberDuck. And after some griping at me, it will upload them, and now they're up there.
Gotcha.
So this is a fairly simple process once you actually get into it. I think where people get tripped up is actually opening the connection and then being able to figure out where do I put
Gotcha.
where do I put it. Normally, most web hosts provide a public HTML folder that when you put your index page in there, that's your home page, and
Okay.
that's your. So
this-
for this,
yeah.
if I were to go to it now, I go to helenino.com/blocks, and I didn't name it index. So technically, if I hit, oh, that's wrong. This one. We'll see what happens. Normally, yeah, it'll show me just a directory of what's in there,
Oh, okay.
or an index of what's in there. If I go to blocks.html, there's the actual page. So this would be the URL for it. So I have this directory and this file name
Okay.
at my domain.
So through CyberDucks, you're like putting all the content on their servers, and the people are connecting to their servers to access. each
Yes.
page. Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
That's it. Yeah, that's about all I got.
Okay.